There is something quietly humiliating about the comparison once you notice it. 20th century Germany, the most formidable industrial power Europe had ever assembled, produced engineers capable of designing autobahns that still carry traffic a century later, airships that crossed oceans, and rockets that would eventually escape Earth's gravity. Yet that same system failed to create a single infantry rifle that could outlive a design conceived by the son of a Scottish watchmaker during the reign of Queen Victoria. The imbalance is not merely technical. It is philosophical. It exposes a fault line between two approaches to war, industry, and human behavior that would define the modern battlefield. James Paris Lee never saw the full consequences of his work. He died in 1904, just as the British Army formally adopted what would become the short magazine Lee-Enfield, a rifle that appeared unremarkable even by the standards of its own time. Across the Channel, German arsenals were already perfecting the Gewehr 98, a Mauser design so mechanically refined that it would become the reference standard for bolt-action rifles for the next century. German engineers knew exactly what they had created. Tighter tolerances, exceptional accuracy at long range, a controlled feed bolt system so reliable that American sportsmen would later pay premium prices for civilian versions. On paper, the Mauser was superior by almost every measurable criterion. And yet, more than 100 years later, the Mauser as a military rifle is extinct. The Lee-Enfield is not. Walk into a gun market in Peshawar today and you will find Lee-Enfields for sale that still function exactly as intended. Not decorative reproductions, not museum restorations, but working rifles. Rifles carried by shepherds in the Hindu Kush. Rifles feared by poachers in East African reserves. Rifles used by Canadian rangers to deter polar bears north of the Arctic Circle. Try to find a Gewehr 98 still in active military service anywhere on Earth. Try to find a Carabiner 98K being cleaned tonight by a young conscript preparing for patrol tomorrow. You cannot. Every German service rifle from both world wars has crossed the same threshold, from weapon to artifact, from tool to collectible. The Lee-Enfield refused to make that transition. This is not a story about nostalgia or sentiment. It is not about which rifle was better in the abstract. It is a story about engineering philosophy, about what happens when perfection becomes the enemy of adequacy, about logistics, supply chains, colonial inheritance, and the brutal arithmetic of war. It is also a story told through numbers so lopsided that they force uncomfortable conclusions. Between 1895 and the present day, approximately 17 million Lee-Enfield rifles were produced across Britain, the Empire, and later the Commonwealth, in dozens of variants. The rifle served officially with the armed forces of more than 46 nations. It fought in the Boer War, the First World War, the Second World War, Korea, both Indo-Pakistani wars, the Malayan Emergency, the Mau Mau Uprising, the Suez Crisis, and a long list of conflicts too small or politically inconvenient to earn a chapter in history books. It is still issued today. Not ceremonially, but operationally. Germany, by contrast, produced roughly 14 million Mauser pattern military rifles between 1898 and 1945. Superb rifles, without question. Rifles that American ordnance officers examined after both world wars and declared mechanically superior to their own Springfields. Rifles that formed the foundation of nearly every successful bolt-action hunting design of the 20th century. And yet, as military tools, they vanished. By the mid-1950s, not a single German-designed rifle from either World War remained in standard military service anywhere in the world. The question this disparity demands is unavoidable. How does a rifle designed primarily for rapid fire at close to medium-range outlast weapons engineered for precision? How does a 10-round magazine and a cock-on-close bolt outlive the acknowledged king of controlled feed accuracy? How does cheap defeat exquisite, not once, but across more than a century? The answer begins not in Europe, but in South Africa, at the turn of the 20th century, when the British Empire discovered that its soldiers were dying in numbers that embarrassed the world's largest power. They were being killed by farmers. Dutch-descended Boers armed with German rifles. Men who had never attended a military academy, who had no formal drill, who simply understood that the nature of warfare had changed while London was still polishing cavalry sabres. The Boer War was expected to be brief. 60,000 irregular fighters against the largest empire in human history. London bookmakers gave it 3 months, perhaps 4. They were wrong by nearly 2 years and roughly 40,000 British casualties. What happened between 1899 and 1902 transformed British military thinking more profoundly than any conflict since Waterloo. Boer commandos, armed largely with Mauser Model 1895 rifles purchased from Germany, demonstrated that a skilled marksman with a modern repeating rifle could neutralize entire infantry formations trained in 19th-century doctrine. At battles like Margersfontein in December 1899, concealed Boer riflemen inflicted catastrophic losses on advancing British units in minutes. The Highland Brigade walked into a wall of aimed fire that their officers simply had not anticipated. Courage was not the issue. Equipment was. When war erupted, British frontline infantry still carried the Lee-Enfield, a transitional rifle that combined James Paris Lee's detachable box magazine and rear-locking bolt with barrels designed for black powder ammunition. The Lee-Enfield was already obsolete. Its shallow Metford rifling wore rapidly when firing cordite-propelled rounds, sometimes losing accuracy after as few as 3,000 shots. Soldiers reported barrels so eroded that bullets tumbled in flight, striking targets sideways when they struck at all. Meanwhile, the Boers possessed rifles that could deliver accurate fire at 600 yards and beyond. Illiterate farmers had acquired a technological advantage over professional soldiers of the Crown. This was intolerable. The British response was swift and uncharacteristically pragmatic. By 1904, the Army adopted the short-magazine Lee-Enfield Mark I. The SMLE retained Lee's brilliant bolt and magazine system but replaced the fragile Metford rifling with deeper Enfield-patterned grooves capable of withstanding cordite without degradation. The barrel was shortened to just over 25 inches, a decision that horrified traditionalists who equated length with accuracy. Overall length dropped to approximately 44 inches, producing a rifle suitable for infantry, cavalry, and artillery crews alike. This was revolutionary standardization. Previously, armies issued different weapons to different branches, long rifles for infantry, carbines for cavalry, specialized arms for specialists. The SMLE collapsed all of this into a single platform. One rifle. One training system. One ammunition supply. One set of spare parts. The officers at Woolwich Arsenal understood something German planners would repeatedly underestimate. In industrial warfare, the rifle that reaches the soldier matters more than the rifle that wins competitions. The SMLE was not perfected in a laboratory. It evolved through use. Each modification emerged from reports written by soldiers in barracks, trenches, and colonial outposts where the rifle actually lived. Reliability mattered more than elegance. Speed mattered more than theoretical strength. By the time Europe stumbled toward catastrophe in 1914, Britain possessed not only hundreds of thousands of Lee-Enfields, but a doctrine built around them. That doctrine would soon shock the world. That doctrine had a name, though it sounded faintly absurd even to the men expected to master it. They called it the Mad Minute, and it represented one of the most radical departures from 19th-century infantry thinking ever attempted. Introduced formally in 1908, it required a trained British soldier to fire 15 aimed rounds at a 12-inch target from 300 yards within 60 seconds. This was not spray fire. Every shot had to count. 15 hits was the minimum passing standard. Many exceeded it. Some doubled it. A handful approached the limits of what a human body could physically sustain. This doctrine was not built around the rifle alone. It was built around repetition, muscle memory, and institutional discipline. British regulars trained relentlessly in rapid bolt manipulation, reloading by feel, maintaining sight picture while cycling the action. The Lee-Enfield made this possible. Its cock-on-close bolt required less force at the moment of unlocking, allowing soldiers to work the action without lifting the rifle from the shoulder. The 10-round magazine reduced interruptions. Everything about the system favored controlled speed. German intelligence noticed and dismissed it. When war came in August 1914, German planners expected the British Expeditionary Force to be a minor inconvenience. Britain was not a continental military power. Its army was small, professional, and scattered across the empire. At most, German intelligence estimated perhaps 100,000 British troops could be deployed to France. They would fight bravely, no doubt, but their rifles would behave like everyone else's. Slow. Deliberate. Manageable. On the morning of August 23, 1914, near the Belgian town of Mons, that assumption collapsed. The British Expeditionary Force, approximately 80,000 men, took up defensive positions along the Mons-Condé Canal. Opposing them was General Alexander von Kluck's First Army, roughly twice their number, advancing in dense formations that reflected doctrines refined in the wars of German unification. The weather was grey and wet. Visibility was poor. German officers expected resistance, but not surprise. What followed entered military legend almost immediately. Private Frank Richards of the Royal Welsh Fusiliers later described the engagement with understated precision. "The Germans came on in masses," he wrote, "and we knocked them over like ninepins." His account was echoed across units and battalions. German infantry advancing across open ground encountered a volume of accurate rifle fire that their officers could not reconcile with reality. Reports filtered upward claiming the British had deployed extraordinary numbers of machine guns. Some suggested new automatic weapons. Others suspected deception. There were no machine guns in such numbers. There was only training. A British infantryman with an SMLE could fire 30 aimed rounds in a minute without conscious effort. The bolt cycled smoothly. The rifle stayed on target. Reloading was rapid. German soldiers carrying the Gewehr 98, accurate and powerful as it was, could not match the tempo. Their rifles held 5 rounds. Reloading required deliberate interruption. The 90-degree bolt throw demanded greater movement. In isolation, these differences seemed trivial. Under fire, multiplied across thousands of rifles, they were devastating. German after-action reports consistently overestimated British machine gun strength by factors of 3 to 5. Entire units stalled or broke under fire they believed impossible for infantry alone to produce. Mons did not halt the German advance permanently, but it inflicted a psychological shock that rippled through the high command. For the first time, German planners confronted a truth they had not anticipated. A professional army trained for rapid-aimed fire could distort the battlefield in ways doctrine had not accounted for. The retreat from Mons eventually dissolved into the trench warfare that would define the next for years. In static conditions, the Lee-Enfield's advantage in rate of fire mattered less. Artillery dominated. Machine guns harvested men by the thousands. And yet, the rifle remained essential. Trench raids required weapons that functioned in mud, blood, and filth. Sniping demanded accuracy sufficient to exploit brief exposures. Here, the SMLE performed better than its reputation suggested. Despite its combat-oriented design, it proved capable of excellent accuracy when paired with skilled marksmen. More importantly, it kept working. Generous tolerances, often criticized in peacetime as evidence of inferior craftsmanship, proved decisive in the trenches. Mud that sees tightly fitted Mauser actions could be cleared from Lee-Enfields with brute force and indifference. Bolts cycled. Extractors held. Rifles continued firing under conditions that reduced more elegant mechanisms to clubs. By November 1918, British and Commonwealth forces had fired an estimated 2 billion rounds of .303 ammunition. Many of the rifles that delivered those rounds were the same weapons issued in 1914. They had been rebuilt, refurbished, rebarreled, but fundamentally unchanged. The Mark III design, introduced in 1907, required no radical modification to survive for years of industrial slaughter. Germany, by contrast, emerged from the war already questioning its assumptions. The Gewehr 98 had performed admirably. No one doubted its accuracy or mechanical integrity. But German planners recognized that something had gone wrong. Their infantry doctrine had been outpaced by reality. Their rifles, optimized for precision at distance, had offered little advantage in the chaos of modern battle. Even before the armistice ink dried, German engineers began exploring replacements. The philosophical divergence deepened. German engineering culture operated on a principle that had served it well for decades. Precision manufacturing produced superior weapons, and superior weapons won wars. This philosophy had shattered French fortresses in 1870. It had built battleships that challenged Britain's naval supremacy. It would eventually produce some of the most advanced tanks, aircraft, and rockets of the Second World War. Applied to infantry rifles, however, the philosophy concealed a fatal assumption. The Mauser action was, by any mechanical standard, a masterpiece. Paul Mauser's controlled feed bolt remains the gold standard against which sporting rifles are judged. Its front-locking lugs distributed stress efficiently. Its non-rotating claw extractor maintained positive control of cartridges throughout the feeding cycle, virtually eliminating double feeds. Factory accuracy exceeded what British arsenals could produce without hand fitting. None of this mattered as much as German planners believed. The Gewehr 98 required a 90-degree bolt rotation to unlock, compared to the Lee-Enfield 60. That 30-degree difference translated into measurably slower cycling for average soldiers. The internal 5-round magazine, loaded via stripper clips, halved sustained fire capacity. The rifle's overall length, nearly 49 inches, made it unwieldy in trenches, vehicles, and urban combat. German soldiers nicknamed it Der Besenstiel, the broomstick, not affectionately. By the mid-1930s, German ordnance officers acknowledged these limitations. Their response was the Carabiner 98K, adopted in 1935. Shorter, handier, better suited to mechanized warfare, it tacitly admitted what the British had understood since 1904. Shorter rifles served modern soldiers better. But the fundamentals remained unchanged. The action remained Mauser. The magazine remained 5 rounds. The bolt throw remained 90 degrees. Germany entered the Second World War with approximately 4 million Carabiner 98K rifles manufactured or in production. They performed adequately across every theater, from Norway to North Africa to the Eastern Front. German infantry remained dangerous opponents. Yet the rifle was already conceptually obsolete before the first shots were fired in Poland. German planners knew this. What followed was a procurement catastrophe that historians still struggle to explain. Between 1939 and 1945, Germany adopted, produced, and abandoned a succession of rifle designs with astonishing speed. The Gewehr 41 Mauser and Walther variants attempted semi-automatic solutions and failed catastrophically in field conditions. The Gewehr 43 corrected some issues while introducing others, never achieving reliability comparable to the American M1 Garand. The FG-42 was a remarkable weapon, innovative and effective, produced in numbers too small to influence outcomes. The Gewehr 44 arrived too late and in insufficient quantities to matter. Meanwhile, every German soldier still needed a rifle. And that rifle remained the Carabiner 98K, a design that represented incremental adaptation rather than conceptual evolution. Across the Channel, British procurement followed a very different path. When war returned in 1939, Britain did not chase innovation. It simplified. The Lee-Enfield number for Mark I, introduced in 1941, was not a new rifle. It was a rationalized version of the Mark III, redesigned for faster wartime production. The action remained identical to rifles manufactured decades earlier. The caliber remained .303. The magazine remained 10 rounds. A soldier from Mons could have picked it up and used it without instruction. This was not stagnation. It was institutional memory. The British understood that modern war punished complexity. Training programs required consistency. Ammunition supply chains could not accommodate endless experimentation. Logistics won wars, and logistics demanded sameness. Germany chased innovation. Britain perfected adequacy. The consequences of that divergence would soon become impossible to ignore. Dunkirk should have ended the Lee-Enfield. By every rational measure, it was the kind of disaster from which no army recovers quickly. Between the 26th of May and the 4th of June, 1940, roughly 338,000 Allied soldiers escaped across the Channel under constant aerial attack, but they left behind nearly everything that made an army functional. Beaches and fields were littered with abandoned equipment, tens of thousands of vehicles, hundreds of thousands of tons of supplies, and an estimated 90,000 rifles. The British Army had saved its men but stripped itself bare. What happened next revealed the difference between an industrial system built for resilience and one built for brilliance. Germany, watching from the air, believed Britain had been disarmed. The assumption was logical. No modern army could lose that quantity of equipment and recover in months. Britain, however, was not a single factory or even a single island. It was a network. Lee-Enfield production did not reside solely at Enfield Lock. Birmingham Small Arms produced rifles. So did the London Small Arms Company. More importantly, so did factories far beyond the reach of the Luftwaffe. Ishapur Arsenal in India. Lithgow in Australia. Long Branch in Canada. These facilities were not emergency backups. They were integral components of a deliberately distributed system. When German bombs began falling on British cities during the Blitz, production did not halt. It flowed elsewhere. This is the context in which the Lee-Enfield number for Mark I emerged. Introduced in 1941, it represented not a leap forward, but a conscious retreat from unnecessary refinement. Components that required precise hand-fitting on the Mark III were redesigned for machine production. The rear sight was simplified. The nose cap re-engineered. The goal was not to make a better rifle, but to make enough rifles, fast. The result was decisive. A competent factory worker could produce a number for rifle in roughly half the time required to manufacture its predecessor. By 1942, British and Commonwealth production had not merely replaced the losses at Dunkirk. It exceeded pre-war output. Rifles flowed outward from Britain, Canada, India, and Australia to every front simultaneously. In North Africa, the 8th Army carried Lee-Enfields from El Alamein to Tunis. In Italy, they climbed mountains and fought through villages designed for medieval warfare. In Burma, the 14th Army, later known as the Forgotten Army, faced conditions that destroyed lesser weapons. Monsoon rains turned jungle paths into rivers of mud. Weapons rusted overnight. Wood swelled. Metal corroded. Rifles designed to tight tolerances seized and died. The Lee-Enfield did not. Australian soldiers reported rifles continuing to function after immersion in swamp water. Indian troops carried them through months of rain with minimal maintenance. The action cycled even when grit and organic debris infiltrated the mechanism. Generous tolerances, mocked in peacetime inspections, proved to be a form of foresight. The Jungle War revealed another advantage that would never appear in design drawings. Sustained reliability without maintenance. Japanese forces, operating at the end of overstretched supply lines, struggled to replace broken equipment. British and Commonwealth units, despite operating thousands of miles from home, received steady ammunition resupply through naval and aerial logistics networks that had been refined over decades of imperial policing. A soldier needed .303 ammunition and occasional oil. The rifle asked for nothing else. Germany's experience was the inverse. German soldiers on the Eastern Front faced extreme cold rather than humidity. The Carabiner 98K performed adequately in sub-zero conditions, but adequate was not enough when everything else failed. Lubricants froze. Metals contracted. Bolt manipulation slowed. Meanwhile, Soviet industry, dispersed east of the Urals, outproduced German manufacturing by staggering margins. Germany could build excellent rifles. It could not build enough of anything. By 1943, Allied strategic bombing began systematically dismantling German industrial capacity. Rifle production facilities at Oberndorf, Suhl, and Berlin fell within range of American heavy bombers. Production collapsed alongside tanks and aircraft. Skilled labor vanished into the army or the rubble. By 1944, Germany was issuing Volkssturm militia members with Gewehr 98 rifles pulled from storage, weapons manufactured during the First World War pressed back into service because nothing else was available. Britain faced no such desperation. By 1944, the British Empire was producing approximately 300,000 Lee-Enfields annually across its global network. Not only were its own forces fully equipped, but rifles were flowing outward to resistance movements across occupied Europe. French partisans, Yugoslav guerrillas, Polish underground fighters all carried Lee-Enfields delivered by parachute. These rifles were expendable in ways precision weapons could never be. Lose one and another arrived. Break one and the parts were interchangeable with any other rifle from the same decade. Germany's engineering excellence produced rifles individual soldiers cherished. Britain's pragmatic adequacy produced rifles empires could afford to give away. The contrast extended beyond production numbers. It reached into doctrine and institutional psychology. German planners, confronted with the limitations of the bolt-action rifle, attempted to innovate their way out of the problem. Each attempt introduced new complexity. Semi-automatic rifles failed under field conditions. Specialized weapons arrived too late. Revolutionary designs like the Gewehr 44 pointed toward the future but could not alter the present. The British made no such attempt. They accepted the limits of the bolt-action rifle and optimized everything around it. Training remained consistent. Ammunition remained standardized. Spare parts remained interchangeable. The Lee-Enfield was not expected to be the future. It was expected to function today. When the war ended in Europe on May 8, 1945, the consequences of these choices became unmistakable. German military rifles faced extinction. Soviet forces captured millions of Carabiner 98K rifles during their advance into Germany. Many were redistributed briefly to satellite states. Most were dismantled. Steel recycled. Machinery shipped east as reparations. The Mauser factories themselves were dismantled. Oberndorf fell into the French occupation zone and was stripped of its industrial heart. By 1950, German military rifle production had ceased entirely. The Lee-Enfield story diverged in the opposite direction. India achieved independence in August 1947, inheriting Ishapur arsenal and complete rifle manufacturing capability. Rather than abandoning British patterns, independent India continued producing Lee-Enfields, first in .303, later rechambered to 7.62 by 51 mm NATO as the Ishapur 2A and 2A1. These rifles equipped Indian forces during the 1962 war with China and both major conflicts with Pakistan. They remained in reserve service well into the 21st century. Pakistan followed a similar path. The Pakistan ordnance factories maintained Lee-Enfield production alongside newer designs, recognizing that frontier forces and reserve units required weapons that could be mastered quickly and maintained with minimal infrastructure. The rifle that had armed the British Raj now armed the nations that replaced it. Australia retained Lee-Enfields until 1959, when the L1A1 self-loading rifle entered service. Even then, large numbers remained in reserve. New Zealand held theirs longer. Canada never truly gave them up at all. The Canadian Rangers retained the Lee-Enfield number for Mark I as their standard long arm because nothing else functioned reliably in Arctic conditions where temperatures routinely plunged below -40 degrees Celsius. This was not nostalgia. It was necessity. Attempts to replace the Lee-Enfield failed repeatedly. Modern rifles with polymers and advanced lubricants seized, cracked, or fogged. The Lee-Enfield, built entirely from steel and wood, continued to function with minimal lubrication. Canadian defense planners eventually acknowledged the truth by specifying that any replacement rifle would have to match Lee-Enfield reliability in extreme cold. The Colt Canada C-19, adopted in 2014, was designed to meet a standard set by a rifle conceived more than a century earlier. Afghanistan provided a different validation. Lee-Enfield circulated widely among insurgent groups, purchased, inherited, or manufactured through the Khyber Pass arms trade. Gunsmiths in Peshawar produced functional Lee-Enfields using hand tools and techniques unchanged since the 19th century. Ammunition remained abundant because .303 British cartridges continued to be manufactured in India, Pakistan, and elsewhere. A rifle that required advanced industrial infrastructure to produce would not have survived such an ecosystem. The Lee-Enfield thrived in it. By the mid-20th century, the divergence was complete. Germany possessed no military rifles at all. Britain and its former colonies possessed millions. The implications extended far beyond firearms. The decades after 1945 should have erased the Lee-Enfield. The empire that created it dissolved. The industrial age that justified it gave way to polymers, stamped steel, and selective fire. Assault rifles replaced bolt actions. Television replaced empire. Jet aircraft replaced propellers. By every conventional measure, the Lee-Enfield belonged to the past. And yet it persisted, not as a relic clung to by sentimental traditionalists, but as a living tool embedded in systems that modernity never fully replaced. In Malaya, beginning in 1948, British and Commonwealth forces fought communist insurgents in dense jungle terrain where engagements occurred at short distances and logistics were fragile. The Lee-Enfield proved ideally suited to this environment. Its balance allowed fast handling in undergrowth. Its reliability minimized dependence on supply convoys vulnerable to ambush. When rifles failed, soldiers did not wait for specialized parts. They fixed them. When ammunition ran low, resupply remained simple because .303 production never ceased. The emergency dragged on for 12 years. The rifle never changed. In Kenya during the Mau Mau uprising, Lee-Enfields armed colonial forces, home guards, and, through capture, insurgents themselves. The same rifle appeared on both sides of the conflict, passed from hand to hand, its allegiance determined only by who held it. During the Suez Crisis in 1956, Egyptian troops carried Lee-Enfields against British paratroopers also armed with Lee-Enfields, some in the shortened No. 5 jungle carbine configuration. Few weapons in history have fired at themselves across battle lines so frequently. Germany, meanwhile, possessed none. The Basic Law of 1949 restricted West Germany's ability to rearm. When rearmament finally occurred in the mid-1950s, German soldiers received Belgian FN-FAL rifles, later replaced by the domestically produced G3. The Mauser lineage survived only in civilian hunting rifles, admired for craftsmanship but severed from military relevance. The military Mauser was finished. By the 1970s, the disparity had become stark. Active German military rifles from either World War numbered effectively zero. Lee-Enfields in active service numbered in the millions, spread across Asia, Africa, and the Commonwealth. The rifle had outlived not only its German counterpart, but the empire that produced it, the colonial system it enforced, and the industrial order that shaped it. Modern imagery captured this contradiction in ways statistics could not. In 2012, a photograph circulated widely showing a Canadian Ranger on patrol in Afghanistan, carrying a Lee-Enfield fitted with a modern optic. The juxtaposition was jarring. Body armor, satellite communications, and night vision equipment surrounded a rifle designed before the Wright brothers flew. The explanation was not symbolism. It was necessity. The rifle functioned where others failed. The Canadian Rangers patrol more than 4 million square kilometers of Arctic and Northern Territory. Temperatures routinely fall below -40 degrees Celsius. At such extremes, modern lubricants congeal. Polymers become brittle. Springs lose elasticity. Electronics fog or fail entirely. The Lee-Enfield, built from steel and wood, functions with minimal lubrication and mechanical indifference to cold. Rangers report rifles firing after being buried in snow, dragged across ice, and neglected for months. Attempts to replace the rifle failed repeatedly until Canadian defense planners effectively admitted defeat by designing a modern replacement around Lee-Enfield performance parameters. Afghanistan reinforced the pattern from another angle. Lee-Enfield circulated freely among tribal fighters, acquired through inheritance, black markets, or manufacture in the Khyber Pass. Gunsmiths in Peshawar produced functional rifles using hand tools and scrap steel, guided by patterns memorized across generations. Ammunition availability sustained the ecosystem. As long as India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh continued producing .303 British cartridges, the rifle remained viable. No advanced supply chain was required. No factory monopoly existed. The design was open source before the term existed. This produced one of history's strangest reversals. A weapon designed to enforce Victorian imperial authority now armed those resisting modern Western power. The rifle changed sides so often that the concept of sides lost meaning. It became infrastructure rather than ideology. Beyond combat, the Lee-Enfield found roles its designers never imagined. Indian police carried it for rural patrol and crowd control. Bangladeshi border guards used it along the Myanmar frontier. Nepali units maintained it for mountain operations where simplicity outweighed sophistication. Private security forces in East Africa issued it to guards protecting wildlife reserves from poachers. The same rifle that once armed colonial game wardens now protected elephants from extinction. The sporting world preserved a parallel legacy. Hunters across the Commonwealth trusted Lee-Enfield actions for dangerous game, valuing the fast bolt and reliable feeding under stress. Competitive shooting disciplines in Australia and New Zealand maintained Lee-Enfield categories long after other nations abandoned bolt-action service rifles. Collectors paid premium prices for matching number examples with verified provenance, not because the rifles were inert, but because everyone understood they could still fire tomorrow. The Mauser survived as well, but differently. It lived in walnut stocks and sporting catalogues, in controlled feed hunting rifles admired for precision. It survived as craftsmanship, not infrastructure. No military force anywhere on Earth issues a Mauser pattern rifle as standard equipment. The action lives on. The weapon does not. The numbers tell the story with brutal clarity. Approximately 17 million Lee-Enfields produced across more than a century of continuous manufacture. Formal adoption by 46 nations. Verified military service spanning the 19th, 20th, and 21st centuries. Ongoing operational use in Canada, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Nepal, with informal use documented across Africa, the Middle East, and Central Asia. Ammunition production uninterrupted since 1889, manufactured on every inhabited continent. Germany produced approximately 14 million Mauser pattern military rifles over 47 years. Peak deployment occurred in 1944. Complete military extinction followed within a decade. No nation issues a German-designed rifle from either World War. The Gewehr 98 and Carabiner 98K survive only as collectibles, sporting conversions, and museum exhibits. This disparity cannot be explained by chance. 3 factors ensured the Lee-Enfield's survival. First, distributed manufacturing. Production was never centralized. When British factories burned, Indian, Australian, and Canadian facilities continued. When empire collapsed, successor states inherited complete industrial capability. Germany concentrated production within a vulnerable geographic core, leaving no durable manufacturing legacy. Second, design philosophy. The Lee-Enfield prioritized field performance over theoretical excellence. Generous tolerances, rear-locking bolts, and large magazines reflected lessons learned under fire. German engineers optimized for accuracy and mechanical elegance, producing rifles superb on test benches and marginally better in controlled conditions, but not decisively superior where it mattered. Britain built rifles for mud, neglect, and human error. Germany built rifles for measurement. Third, ammunition immortality. The .303 British cartridge remained standardized, abundant, and cheap. Its continued production justified continued rifle service, and continued rifle service justified continued production. German 7.92 by 57 mm ammunition, while ballistically excellent, depended on an industrial system destroyed by war. When factories vanished, rifles became liabilities. These factors reinforced one another across generations. Each year Lee-Enfields remained in service made replacement less urgent. Each year ammunition remained available made obsolescence less likely. The system sustained itself long after its creators disappeared. There is a lesson here that extends beyond firearms. The weapon that wins is rarely the weapon that impresses engineers. It is the weapon that arrives, functions, and can be replaced when lost. War is logistics before it is valor. Empire is logistics before it is ideology. Britain understood this instinctively, building systems that favored adequate performance at scale over excellent performance in isolation. James Paris Lee never lived to see the consequences of his work. He died believing his rifle was merely competent. He never witnessed the mad minute at Mons, the jungle fighting in Burma, or the Arctic patrols where his design still functions flawlessly. He never saw Khyber Pass gunsmiths treating his bolt geometry as sacred, replicating it by hand for customers who would never know his name. He certainly never imagined that a rifle purchased today for the price of a modest meal could outlast, outperform, and ultimately outlive the finest products of German military engineering. But it did. It does. And somewhere this evening, as the sun sets over mountains that have watched empires rise and fall for millennia, a man is cleaning a Lee-Enfield his grandfather carried, preparing for tomorrow. He trusts a mechanism that has never failed him. The German rifles are silent behind glass. The Lee-Enfield refuses to die.